welcome to the Resilient Mental State Podcast. I'm Kyle Shepard, husband, father, and resilience instructor of over 10 years. Join me as I sit down with writers, independent thinkers, and extraordinary individuals to discuss their unique wisdom through the lens of resilience. Resilience is the ability to effectively manage and recover from stress. It is essential to endure and grow from life's inevitable adversities. Resilience is a skill that can be trained. Scott Shetler, my favorite physical trainer on planet Earth. We've had a podcast together already, and I've known you for a few years now. And every time I read your work, get the chance to talk to you or text with you now, I learn something new. I think about how I'm applying it to my life. Even though your ass looks like you're 30 years old, you've actually been in the fitness industry for that long, initially training and learning from many mentors to include the legendary Louis Simmons of Westside Barbell. As you gained knowledge and experience, you eventually opened your own gym, Extreme Performance Training Systems, or EPTS Gym, which is also a website where you do virtual coaching, group coaching. You have a Discord full of information that I use and is phenomenal. Your Substack, Strength and Health, one of my favorite resources for all things strength and health. Go figure, it's in the name. That was one of the earliest finds that I had on Substack, and still one of the most and best return on investments, particularly for someone who likes to physically train in a variety of domains. And then now you're an author of 2 recently published books that I have sitting behind me, Barbell Ronin and Conjugate for Old People and Recovering Meatheads. Awesome titles, amazing covers, but the books are such easy but useful reads that pair very well together. How the hell are you doing, brother?
I'm doing pretty good, man. That was a heck of an introduction, man. You kind of raised the bar, man. I hope I can live up to it.
Well, hey, how about I put in our last conversation? If people listen to that first, you'll already exceed that bar that anyone could have, because that first conversation we had, we only got to talk for like an hour and 15 minutes. And I found myself like, man, I wish I scheduled this for 3 hours, because you are a wealth of information, not only in the written form in all the ways that I just said, but talking to you that time, I was just like, wow, skyrocketed my respect for you and the knowledge that you have.
After re-listening to that talk, I was like, man, I think I squeezed in 3 hours worth of verbal diarrhea. I was like, okay, this time I got to slow it down a little bit.
It was so good. It was so good. I'm looking forward to expanding upon that, first and foremost with what inspired you not only to write 1 book, but 2 books recently.
You know, I published some books years ago, and it's like I did like 7 or 8 of them. They're just really more technical manuals, stuff that I was into at the time. And I always wanted to get back to writing. I wanted to publish more books. I've had a lot more experience since then. I even thought when I started writing those first books, I'd been in the industry for 12 years at that point in time, like 12, I had this idea, like I need a decade under my belt before I can start writing, before I could start, doing anything like that, because I needed experience. Right. And now here I am, like you said, going on 3 decades. And I felt like I waited too long. And that's actually why I started my Substack. Was I wanted something that was a little bit easier than writing a book, where I could start building a habit of writing. And I just said, I'm going to do 1 article a week. And I maintain that tempo for, I've been doing it for 3 years now, I guess, over 3 years. And then the only reason I added the paid tier was because people started paying me. I'm like, shit, I don't even have any paid content. I got to do something. So it started as some instructional videos, and I'll still do more videos and stuff like that. But I've done a little bit more written and a little bit more in depth, like kind of coaching kind of stuff. So I hope it's like I hope it's like worth $8 a month. If not, somebody tell me and I'll try to do more. But I wanted to get in the regular habit of writing again. And then, like I was telling you before we went on here, I take like 1 trip a year. I go back to Ohio to visit family and friends and stuff like that. And I was like, you know what, man, I need to buckle down. I want to get these 2 books, because I already had the framework. I already had the outline. They're already like articles on my Substack, So that was the reason why I chose these as my initial ones. And I was like, you know what, I'm gonna focus. I'm gonna stop wasting, time at night at the gym, if I got an hour here, I'm just going to get in just get the ball rolling. And it worked. I hit this stride that I hadn't hit before, man. And, it came together really well. And it was like the deeper I got to barbell Ronin, the more I was starting to get ideas for conjugate for old people and stuff like that. I'm like, man, I got to do that one next. It seemed like kind of a natural evolution because I was writing so much about conjugate, stuff on my Substack.
I learned about conjugate because of you. I'd heard the word, but I didn't really understand the system behind it at all, the history behind it. And yeah, your Substack, your posts, you, like many of my favorite writers, can say so much with such few words. Both the philosophy, which these two books, I'm glad you released them so closely together because they're both like your posts are quick, easy reads. Like you could read this easily in a day, but the information and the wisdom you can get out of it, or at least the knowledge you can get out of it. The wisdom is actually getting your ass under the barbell and putting in the effort. And then the second book, understanding how to do so, particularly if you're a beginner or advanced age, just how you can apply first the philosophy in barbell Ronin and then the practicality in conjugate for old people. They pair so nicely together. But again, like your posts, it's a quick, easy read. So now you can reread when you want to, but start applying and then reflect back. And you have the why in barbell Ronin, aspects of the how, at least for mindset. But then the how is definitely in conjugate for old people, where you actually give some ideas for systems. And then, of course, your paid tier on Substack, you can go deeper with the content that you have. We'll talk about some of the recent posts that have blown my mind that are really good. But then Discord and your gym and the online content, even deeper yet. So I love the idea that you have tons of free content, which I would pay more than $8 a month for your free stuff. $8 a month for what you're giving your paid tier. Holy cow. Amazing return investment and easy subscribe and pay to subscribe from me. But how you came to the title Barbell Ronin and kind of what was like the genesis behind starting there, that name, and why you wanted to have that book be the first one of your recently published books.
Yeah, it was an article I wrote on Substack a while back, and it got actually some pretty good traction. And one of the guys that follows me, we did a podcast. He interviewed me a while back. I think he's in Poland. His name's Piotr. He said something like he had commented on the article and goes, "That would be an awesome podcast title," or something like, it was something along those lines. And I started thinking like, man, there's almost like a cool, I don't know if you call it a brand or an ethos or just something around, barbell run, because I took kind of my two favorite things, which is the gym and martial arts. Like Miyamoto Musashi is one of my biggest inspirations. I love his books. I just love everything that I've come to learn about him. And I like the way he thought outside of the box, how he didn't follow the doctrine and he just spent his entire life training for the perfect cut, and it was by any means necessary, and it was almost like the Bruce Lee idea of try many things, absorb what's useful, discard the rest. He was known to fight with two swords, which was frowned upon. He, would show up late to duels to piss the other guy off. He would, he would do all these strategy things and things that just weren't, the norm, but it made him arguably one of the most successful swordsmen in history. I mean, he had a lot of life and death duels and he survived, and even the ones that weren't, I forgot how many he's credited, but it's quite a few. So I've always liked the philosophy of not just totally buying into one system or one methodology, because everybody's their own individual case and they've got to try to find out what works for them and not follow something to a T. It's like probably my favorite powerlifter of all time is Ed Cohn, arguably the greatest powerlifter ever in history. And I can't train exactly like him because I'm not him, you know what I'm saying? But I can take a lot of inspiration from the way he trained and I can apply that to my training, right? So this is how I think people need to think about their training, because I'm not, a competitive power lifter like Ed was, but there's incredibly brilliant things with the way he trained that I can distill and bring that into my own practice or that of my clients and athletes that I train. So I always tried to learn from many, because I'm so into the conjugate method, and Louis is really the only person I've ever really claimed to be like a mentor, but there have definitely been a lot of people that inspired me in the industry. But even with that, I'm not a quote unquote West Side guy. I definitely utilize conjugate principles, but the conjugate method is not a program. What it is, it's a system of training that involves training multiple physical qualities concurrently on a weekly basis, right? And that just always made so much more sense to me than doing like long blocked out periods, like typically training progression in the block periodization style or the linear periodization style might involve, a block of higher reps. They might do like a hypertrophy block for 4 to 6 weeks. Then they might roll into a strength block for 4 to 6 weeks. Then they move into a power block for 4 to 6 weeks. The problem is a lot, unless you're training those abilities start to diminish as you move on to successive blocks. And I'm not saying it doesn't work. It's a lot of people have made it work, usually through the pushing up of their accessory work and things like that to support the primary lifts and all that. But the conjugate system just made so much more sense to me. But I'm not like, West Side to a T, but I utilize those principles to create my own specific framework and the framework for the people that I'm working with kind of within those parameters or within that methodology. But everybody I train trains differently. Different exercises, they push things differently, different forms of dynamic training. Some focus more on jumps and throws and more absolute power work. Some focus more on speed training. So, not everybody's doing the same thing, but we're all working under the same umbrella, so to speak. So that was why I always kind of drifted more into the conjugate method once I started learning about it. And like I said, the idea of not having one master, so to speak, or one methodology, that's kind of the ethos of the Ronin. So I just took, my love for barbells and my love for masterless samurai and just put them together. I said, that'd be kind of a cool title, I guess. And the article did pretty well and I got some pretty good feedback on it. So I'm like, I'm just going to take that article, use that as kind of the framework for the book and then just expand upon it, and fill it in and ended up with a book. And I did want to throw some programming in there, even though it's not a quote unquote programming book. I wanted to give some samples of some different strength training programs. I always like to leave people with something that they could take away and apply to their own practice, or something that might get them to think a little bit about, here's how I'm training, here's some things he's presented. Oh, that's cool. Let me try that. And, just to get them thinking a little bit about the way that they train or whatever.
Yeah, the barrier to entry, sometimes you need a little bit of that how. So having a little bit of them there, even though it's primarily mindset, that helps quite a bit when, if especially you are a beginner. And that Bruce Lee quote is always one of my favorites. I say it often when I give a presentation. You talk for an hour, this conversation could be an hour long. You're not going to remember everything we said. I'm not going to remember everything that we say. I can re-listen to it, won't remember everything an hour later, but absorb what is useful, discard what is not. And then the last part, which your book emphasizes quite a bit, add what is uniquely your own. And in today's day and age, where we have access to anything and everything, influencers, experts, competitors, phenomenal trainers, it's hard to sort out the bullshit and also hard to select a system that's right for you. So having guides that can help you focus on the basics, first and foremost, basics in your approach to even getting in the gym, getting under the barbell, in your mindset. And then the basics on how to actually execute is important, because when there are so many optimizations and specializations and shortcuts, which there are no shortcuts, but like promises out there that can leave you failing and lead you astray, brilliance in the basics is what you emphasize all the time in your posts and where this book starts. And just very important to remember. And this book does it very succinctly.
Thanks, man. I really appreciate that.
Absolutely. And now we move on to Conjugate for Old People and Recovering Meatheads. Is this a title that you wrote for yourself?
Yeah, pretty much. My people, man. The recovering meatheads, the has-beens, the over-the-hill iron addicts, But yeah, it's the book. I wanted it to be twofold. One, it's definitely what I've been tapping out a lot about on my Substack. It's just because I'm so immersed in it. it's kind of the right what mentality. But I want to choose these words carefully. It I wanted to do it as kind of a tribute to Louis as somebody who I considered a mentor, because the guy, I got so much from him, and he never asked for anything in return. Just like I'm not special. Anybody who would travel there, visit, try to learn from him. He had an open door policy. Anybody was welcome to visit if you scheduled the visit. He loved to talk about strength. He loved to answer questions, help people. He loved to talk about it. I'm not trying to position myself like I was a West Sider or whatever. I'm not. You have to be invited to train there. I happen to think that based on some of the stories that I hear from some of the guys that train there, you listen to these podcasts and some of the guys that I was able to talk to when I'm up there, being a lifter there wasn't, they might have a little bit different opinion of the man, because, he knew how to motivate people, and a lot of it came from irritating people. He'd get under your skin, he'd talk shit. You had to have, based on everything that I've heard, it wasn't necessarily the physical training that people couldn't handle. It was the mental side of it. It was the pressure that was put on you because of who came before you and what they accomplished, the records, the lifts. It was a tough environment. Anybody could go there and train there 1 day or 2 days, but to do it 4 days a week, week after week after week, year after year after year, it's a very, very hard thing to do. So I think being a visitor, I might maybe saw a different side of Lou than some of the guys that train there with him saw. And I don't claim to know anything about the man other than anything that I learned from him. He was incredibly gracious with his time. He was nice. He was witty. He was funny. I read a lot of trash about him online, just people, and it's people that had never been there, never talked to the guy, never. So, I mean, I don't understand, because he was so kind with his time, with his information, making sure that you had everything, that you understood everything. He never, rushed you out of there. He wanted to make sure you got everything you came there to learn and then some. So I wanted to make it a little bit of a tribute, or at least my way of honoring the what he provided for me, because it's impacted my business. It's impacted my training philosophy. It's impacted that, my clients and my athletes, like his reach is massive, and I'm just one person in that line that's benefited from everything that he learned, studied, applied, experimented with, and shared. So I kind of wanted to do it, make it a little bit of a tribute, to that. But, as the disclaimer says, it's not affiliated or associated with Westside Barbell. It's my interpretation of the conjugate method, and then the things that I've done to make the adjustments for the demographic that are represented in the title of the book. And, there's so much. If you follow the Conjugate Club, I think you're telling me that, Sam kind of follows a little bit of the Conjugate Tactical. I mean, there's tactical. They got guys with football. They got guys with wrestling. They're training a lot of high level BJJ and MMA guys there. So, there's so much, conjugate for this, conjugate for that. I'm like, what about us old farts, that aren't, competing, that still want to get after it and stuff like that? How would I take those methods and apply them to people like me, or people like my clients that I work with who are in their 40s, 50s, and north of that, who utilize these principles as well? So I wanted to kind of make it a general introduction, like an intro to the conjugate method, but then show how I would make those adjustments, or how I have made those adjustments for the older guys and the beat up, the high mileage recovering meatheads who still want to, lift a little heavy on occasion. So.
Yeah, I mean, in Barbell Ronin, you talk a lot about identity, and like motivation will not get you far when it comes to exercising consistently, and discipline is lack of motivation but showing up anyways. And identity takes even a step further. Like, it's not like I'm forcing myself to work out. It's just I'm somebody who works out. And when you have that identity, particularly if you had it in your peak years, your 20s, your early 30s, and you got after it in whatever way that you did, and you had some great results. This book, as I just turned 40, is a very appropriate time for me to read it, because I'm used to, I mean, I'm even wearing the shirt, train hard. And you, of course, still train hard and you talk about training hard in that book. But if you are going for max effort in whatever adaptation you're going after, time after time after time. So, like, my methodology sometimes is max effort, hypertrophy or muscular endurance, and max effort strength, and max effort stamina, max effort endurance. And always going hard. And it's starting to wear on me. And if it's very hard to shift that mentality when you are used to doing it a certain way for so long. But your body, I mean, time conquers all. Your body changes, life circumstance change, or you pick up new information, you try to add on to existing systems. And what this book does so well is it's not about trying to hit those PRs every day. Actually, in your 40s, you see people in their 50s and even 60s, and we know Marshall Peterson in his late 70s, who I know he's not setting PRs, but he is beating most people's PRs in their 20s and 30s at the right age of like 79 now.
Yeah, the guy's
And
amazing.
he's amazing. But he is now, does he still go a little too hard sometimes and acquire some injuries? Absolutely. But he
Hey, but you know what?
has continued.
There's no award for showing up at the finish line of your life with a perfect body either. So, we gotta. It's okay if we want to wreck the joints a little bit or abuse the body a little bit more, as long as we can get to the finish line on our own 2 feet.
Absolutely. So getting banged up here and there, but not having devastating injuries to where you can't do it anymore. So training smartly and consistently rather than training max effort all the time is a big takeaway. And that's a beneficial concept to consider, not only as an aging athlete, not only as a recovering meathead, but also as a beginner or really anyone when you think about what is your specialty area right now if you are a peak athlete and how are you supplementing that and in what ways are you doing so. You combine a lot of these considerations into a very practical, applied philosophy of training with a lot more examples in the second book than, of course, you do in Barbell Running. So with that, you talk about different types of effort. So I talked about max effort for me a lot of times, but for you have maximal effort, and you talk about still using that intermittently, systematically, but also pairing that with dynamic effort, submaximal effort, and repeated effort, that consistency piece. Is that part of the conjugate system that you learned from Louis? Is that more adding your
Yeah.
own? Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Like if you look at the basic, like I said, it's conjugate not program, but there's definitely like a framework that he built the powerlifters training around, and it utilizes 4 days a week, 2 max effort days, one for the upper body, one for the lower body. For them, it was built around the upper body, the bench press, and squat and deadlift variations for the lower body, and then you have dynamic effort days, built for the squat and the deadlift and the bench press. And the main lift on each of those days, on the max effort day, you're working up to either an all-time PR. Ultimately, you want to get 3 lifts at or above 90%, but they were known for going hard and trying to break PRs every time they would go in on max effort day and really pushing it. But the reason that they could do that was because they rotated variations of the main exercise week to week. So it prevented them from accommodating. So they just weren't pushing like a free squat every week and trying to max out it. They were doing like a low bar, or a low box safety barbell, squat. Then they would do like, a 2-inch block pull the next week, and then the week after they might do a suspended good morning, and then the week after that they might do a cambered bar box squat, and then they might rotate to like a deficit deadlift. So they would keep these records for all these individual lifts, and then every time that lift would cycle back in their training, their goal was to break it. He always stressed by 5 pounds, but I've also heard stories where it was like they're throwing a plate. I mean, it was just absolute insanity. And I always think that there's, from the stories that I heard from the guys that actually train there, there's the methodology, which is how Louis wanted them all to train, but then there's the competitive side where, it's like, screw this, throwing it out the window, and dynamic days would turn into max effort contests and stuff like that. I mean, absolute insanity. But yeah, so you'd have the 2 max effort days, then you'd have the 2 dynamic effort days. Now dynamic effort is the lifting of submaximal weights with maximal force or maximal exertion applied to the barbell. And the goal is to improve the rate of force production and how fast the muscle fibers that you're training contract to create maximal force, how fast they can get to maximal force output. So you're lifting the barbell with intent. Jumps and throws and things like that can also fall in there for absolute power, explosive strength. But the one thing that Louis always said, there's different velocities of strength. Strength is measured in time. It's not measured in weight, was what he would always say. So on one end of the spectrum, you had very, very fast velocities, and that would be like absolute power. That would be jumps. That would be like explosive, push-ups, plyometric push-ups. It would be, throwing like medicine balls or very lightweight. And then you move up to like explosive strength, which is typically trained at about 30 to 40% of a 1 rep max, so that the weights can move very, very, very quickly. Then you have speed strength, which is was the common modality trained on the dynamic day, which was typically 50 to 60% weights, 50 to 60% of your max. He really liked the 3-week wave where you do 50% one week, 55 the next week, 60 the next, then cycle back. The volume was very specific. You got about 20 to 25 lifts. It was either like 8x3, 12x2, 5x5. They experimented with many different sets and rep schemes, but the volume was typically in the ballpark of about 20 to 25 reps per exercise per workout, so that the volume was controlled. And then as the weights got heavier, the volume increased, which is what you need to do to get strong. So it's a great way to manage your intensity on the max effort day, manage your volume on the dynamic effort day. So you got one day where you're moving as heavy weight as possible, focus on absolute strength, low volume, high intensity. You got another day where you're lifting moderate intensities with maximal force with a higher volume. So high volume, low intensity, right? And maximal speed. Then the accessory work was the repeated effort method. The repeated effort method is doing repetitions to or near failure. And that is typically looked at as like hypertrophy training, right? Muscle mass training. So by combining the dynamic effort method, the maximal effort method, and the repeated effort method on a weekly microcycle, you're training all the physical abilities on a weekly basis, so you can progress week to week to week. And this allows you to get to and maintain about 90% readiness year round, as opposed to doing like a linear type of training where you start out with really low intensity, high volume, and you spend 12 or 16 weeks chipping up the intensity and lowering the volume to come into the peak, to the contest or whatever. That might take up 12 to 16 weeks. Whereas with the conjugate method, you can maintain a high level of readiness once you get through those initial training phases. Once you build your preparedness, you can maintain a fairly high level of readiness year round. And who does that benefit? That benefits athletes that don't have an off season. You think about people that compete in jiu-jitsu, you think about people that compete in, tennis, golf. There's so many sports that don't really have a quote unquote off season. Yeah, football does, baseball does, basketball does, seasonal sports do. But the people that I'm exposed to, they kind of compete in the stuff year round. Even track and field, they've got indoor track and field, they got outdoor, there's so many different things that these athletes get involved in on a yearly basis. By implementing the conjugate method, it allows you to have a really high base, right? If you can maintain about 85% or 90% of your base, then you pick and choose the contest that you kind of want to peak and taper for. So it makes the periodization really, really easy, in my opinion. But yeah, so going back to the different efforts, Louis always said, strength is measured in time. It's not measured in weight. As a struggle is a struggle. He always had some funny things he'd say, like he'd be presenting and he'd say to some guy, he'd say, man, if I went to his house and he kicked my ass and I went to her house, she kicked my ass, all I know is I got beat up twice. I don't even know, all my body knows is I got beat up twice. I don't even know your names. But the point there is that, a struggle being a struggle, if I need to raise my competition squat, right? If I need to raise my competition free squat and it takes me 5 or 6 seconds to complete a maximal attempt in the free squat, regardless of the weight, but if my maximal weight takes me 5 to 6 seconds to strain through that lift to make that lift, if I do a much harder squat variation in my training, that's going to have carryover as long as the level of effort is the same, right? So if I can squat 500 pounds in the free squat on the powerlifting platform, but I can do I don't know, say 325 pounds with a safety squat bar. It's got the yoke, it's got the cambered bar. It makes the lift harder because it's trying to pull you forward. And then if I do that to a low box where I'm going, say, 3 inches below parallel, now I'm squatting 3 inches deeper. I'm pausing on the box, so I'm breaking up the eccentric concentric chain, and I'm using a specialty bar that makes the lift super, super hard because it's trying to decapitate me as I go down in the hole. Well, if it takes me the same amount of effort to strain 325 on a low box safety squat bar squat as it does to do that 500-pound squat in competition, and I raise that safety bar squat, I'm gonna raise my free squat in contest. Does that make sense? So
Absolutely.
provided the level of effort being the same, you're going to get carryover. And that's the cool thing about and I've written a lot about specialized variety, and that's really what it is. It's not deviating from the squat, the bench press, or the deadlift. It's finding variations of those exercises that contribute to the parent lift, right? And that's how you structure your maximal effort work. And it's absolutely brilliant if you think about it, and if you can apply, if you cannot play into your strengths, but use those exercises to emphasize your weaknesses, you'll get insane carryover. The big mistake I've seen people make is they want to do the exercises all the time that allow like super max loading, like the partials and stuff like that, and they're neglecting the entire range of motion. I'd rather do the deficit deadlift, or I'd rather do a deadlift variation that's harder than the regular deadlift, because I know if that variation goes up, then my regular deadlift's going to go up, because essentially I'm making my regular. If I do a deficit deadlift off a 4-inch block, my regular deadlift just became a 4-inch partial, because, I'm pulling 4 inches greater range of motion. When I go back to the platform, I'm starting 4 inches higher than I do on the deficit. So if my deficit goes up, why wouldn't my deadlift go up? It just doesn't make sense to me. Like in my floor press, where I'm not using leg drive and I let my triceps rest on the ground and pause the barbell in a 90-degree elbow position, which is the weakest point in the bench press. If I can raise my floor press, why wouldn't my bench press go up where I'm using leg drive and I'm activating the stretch shortening cycle and all that, right? So you take the harder variations and you make those your maximal efforts to get stronger. But I don't even know where I'm going with this, but we were talking about efforts and I went off on a tangent. But yeah, so it's those different efforts. It was actually written about in the Science and Practice of Strength Training by Vladimir Zatsiorsky. He presents the definitions for the maximal effort method, the dynamic effort method, the repeated effort method, as being the 3 ways to create muscular tension. So if you really think about it, if you understand those principles and you look at any training program out there, I don't care what it is going to be a combination of those methods, or one of those methods, or a combination of those methods are all going to be 10. Then it's just however they slice it up and make it their own training program.
Like you said, it's brilliant. And this tangent you just went on is like a deeper dive into an answer you gave me when we were talking about progressive overload on our first podcast. And simple-minded me, and I like simplicity. We all do. Like I think of like Jocko has a lot of great content out there, and he'll get questions sometimes of like, how do I get better at pull-ups? And he'll say, do more pull-ups. How do I get better at having difficult conversations? Have more difficult conversations. And so like, do more of the exact thing to get better at it. And that is true to a certain extent. But if I want to get better at my back squat and all I'm doing is that specific back squat, I'm going to plateau. I'm going to reach a stopping point. And I also may have weaknesses within that range of motion or within certain musculature that I currently have, and my form and everything else. So it's limiting in that, in the absence of a coach, or the absence of where your response on our first podcast was like, yes, progressive overload is a very important sports science principle, but how about progressive variability? And you gave an explanation similar to, just not as deep as you just gave. And all those exercises you mentioned, by the way, if you're like me before I started reading a lot of your content, if you don't know what those exercises are, it's another great reason to subscribe to your content. We have videos and explanations of what those are, and also like why you would consider them within a specific movement if you are trying to increase your back squat, your deadlift, or just your strength in general. Because yes, doing more of the same thing will get you better, but only to a certain point. And when you have progressive variability, particularly from a person who's been in the game for as long as you have, that can suggest the right one to help the limitations that you currently have. Now, same effort, different movement, and now you're increasing, even though it's less weight, same effort, like you said, you're going to increase the weight of the movement that you're trying to get better at, or just your overall strength in general, because you're not hitting that point in the main back squat that you're doing in the first place.
And that's the beauty of it because you're now able to strain with a load that your nervous system, like if 500 pound is my back squat, if I squat 325 and that's a maximal effort, that's not the same strain. Even though the strain is there, I'd have to imagine that the stress on the CNS isn't the same, because I'm only using 325 pounds, but I'm just getting more out of that weight. I mean, it's going to be hard. I mean, you're going to get neural fatigue, but you can't just keep adding 550, six, you just can't keep doing that. So if you can find ways to make the lifts harder in your training, you're going to be able to get a lot more mileage out of that. I think, I mean, that's just my opinion. And then the beauty of it is that if you select a handful of lifts, like say you pick 6 exercises and you rotate them over 2 months of training with like a deload in there, right? So that would give you enough. So that's 8 weeks of training. If you also count like maybe a deload in the 4th week or something like that. So you can get through 2 whole months of training, and then you repeat those lifts going into the next 2 months, and you just try to break them by 5 pounds. I mean, you can progress almost indefinitely because you're only hitting those lifts once every 2 months as far as the specific lift. But because it's specialized variety, you're still doing a squat, you're still doing a deadlift, you're still doing a bench press. It's just variations of those. So with these variations, if you can find the ones, and that's where it comes on you to experiment or identify your weaknesses, you can better select the exercises that you can train on that max effort day. You'll really get, I mean, you'd be shocked at it's almost continuous because you're not cycling back to that lift until every, 2 months. You tell me you can't put 5 pounds on a lift in 2 months. It's like, absolutely you can. But it's that idea, it's like the Kaizen principle. It's the small improvements over time. 5 pounds a month is 60 pounds at the end of the year. I mean, that's a huge improvement on any lift, right? So it makes training so simplistic and structured.
Yeah, but also the benefit of having a coach so they can help you get beyond the truly simple of thinking of powerlifting of just, I mean, before I knew you, I would track certain things that I would do in the gym, certain lifts, and really it was basically squat, deadlift, bench press, and a few others. And then of course like body weight movements or other things I was training for with the burpee stuff, whatever. But I would have those PRs on there. And then I would keep doing those movements in different ways to build back up to test my PR. But they were all just different weights and reps of the same movement. So until I met you and started reading your work, did I then add in all of these variations of the main movement or variations of the pull up, variations of the burp, and so many other considerations. Still thinking about what am I doing there in the volume structure to build upon on high max effort days or lower max effort for longer durations, or you name it. So the variation, it's still simple, but it's beyond the truly basic. And you write about this in your books and of course on Substack, like general physical preparedness and functional fitness first. Like you got to have a foundation before you start building and expanding. So set the foundation. And that's where we can get really simple and safe. And your book covers that. But now, as you want to grow in whatever age you are, from a beginner at a young age, or of course, as an older athlete, a recovering meathead, you can continue to improve. And it's more fun that way, too. It's not so redundant, same thing where you're not meeting the numbers that you thought you had and you're getting discouraged. No, like changing it up makes it more interesting, makes it more fun, and creates new challenges, which is one of the main reasons we all get after it anyway, to challenge ourselves.
Sure.
And why not challenge ourselves in new ways, which is going to help us not only have those numbers potentially increase over time based on your age, but also, um, excuse me, also it's going to help us enjoy the experience and find new challenges in the process.
Enjoyment's such a big part of it too. And like, man, think about it like this. If you really sucked at squatting and you knew you had a squat coming up on Monday and you knew that, it's going to be calling for 50 more pounds than you did last week, you're going to be dreading that workout all weekend. You're like, man, I got to go to the fucking gym. I don't even like to squat. I got to, but then like if you Monday's the max effort day, if you just decide Monday morning, like, I'm going to take a low box squat today, or I'm going to do a rack deadlift today, or I'm going to do a deficit deadlift. If you decide that day, then you're not stressing about it. You can decide what you're going to do that day. And as long as you're tracking the lifts, like in a log or whatever, and recording your progress, you don't need to write this stuff out for weeks on end. And that's the nice thing about it. It allows you to really start auto regulating your training, because there's some days like, typically I do my max effort on, my max effort lower body work occurs on Sundays. My max effort upper body occurs on, Tuesdays right now. So in between those two workouts, I got jujitsu on Monday. Well, if, I get some hard rolls or my shoulders are a little beat up or whatever from jujitsu, and I got to, I go into my max effort, bench press on Tuesday, I might say, you know what, I'm going to take a floor press today because it's going to limit the amount of weight that I could use, or I might do a board press, or I might do a press off the pins, or I might do a reverse band press or a slingshot press because then it supports my shoulders a little bit. My shoulders are a little bit achy from, getting an arm barred or something like that, right? So there's ways that you can, it allows you a little bit more freedom as far as auto regulating your training day to day and week to week, so you don't have to be it's structured, but it's not so rigid. You know what I'm saying? I mean, you can adjust things weekly as you go to account for your daily readiness. You can also, if you're somebody who likes the biofeedback tools, like if you have an HRV tracker or something like that, you can use that to dictate what you're going to do that day. And I've talked about this a lot in my writing, particularly for the older athlete or the older lifter. You might not be able to go in and hit max singles every single max effort day. I mean, the singles, they might just be wearing on you, just might be grinding you down and stuff like that. And that happens, especially as you push closer and closer to 100% and you're not, staying around that 90% range where we like to stay. You might go in and you might have to go in and do a max effort lower body workout on Monday or something, but you did your Bioforce HRV that morning, or your Morpheus HRV that morning, and it tells you, oh man, your recovery is only like 75. You shouldn't really push a max effort today unless you want to further drive down your recovery. Okay, cool. I'm going to go in and hit like a sub max set of 5 or something like that. I'll do something heavy, but it's not going to be like soul crushing, like a max effort lift. And then I'm working within the parameters of what my HRV monitoring app is telling me, hey, don't go in there and push it today or else you're going to be paying for it even worse tomorrow. Well, those devices are meant to help you optimize your training. So you can use that in that framework of the conjugate method, where you might just do a heavy lift that day, like a heavy triple or a heavy 5. It might be sub max. It might be like an 80% effort or an 85% effort, heavy, something you're going to feel the weight, but it's not going to be as stressful to the nervous system as working above 90% is. So there's so much flexibility within the framework of the system, but it allows you to still stay progressive, and it allows you to learn how to auto regulate your training based on your daily readiness, which is so important. I mean, especially as we get older, because our recovery is not as good as it used to be. When you're 18, 19, 20, man, you can get like 3 hours of sleep, live on 4 energy drinks a day, and just, go to the gym and absolutely smash it and bounce back the next day. It doesn't happen like that, 50s, 40s, even in your 30s, you start noticing that you start to lose a step. Recovery becomes a bit more important. If you're going out trying to pull all-nighters, if you're binging, binge drinking on the week, you cannot recover from that stuff, man. So the older you get, recovery definitely is a huge factor. And the way those modifications that I make in the Conjugate for Old People book, it shows you how you can work, not always maximally, but still get benefit out of those quote unquote max effort sessions.
Yeah, and I mean, my main reason for training, like a lot of people, I love how you say daily readiness, and just like to be functional, not only in your chosen sport. I love competing, but whether I'm competing or not, I like to stay ready, and that's to play with my kids for as long as possible, to show up in emergency if need be, or just to be able to perform whatever life calls upon me. So that functional fitness aspect, and don't get me wrong, like standard powerlifting movements, standard body weight movements that we're all familiar with, they're going to help you get stronger and healthier. But there are limitations to only a select few movements that you wouldn't know otherwise unless you had access to all the information and different ways to go about it in the ways that you're describing right now. You will be more functional because of it. And then when you get hit with being hurt or even an injury sometimes, there are ways to still, of course, as you're medically monitored and everything else, but there are ways to still get after it safely and effectively and not lose so much because you're under the weather, under recovered, injured in one area of your body when you can train another, or you have limited range of motion for whatever reason. As you mentioned with jujitsu, like there's just the full range of motion sometimes in a bench press when the shoulders are hurting. Same here. How can I modify still based on the plan? If I'm going to stay in that area of the body that I want to train, it's just,
Dude,
again, it's
jujitsu is one of the best ways to lower your bench press. I remember one of my training partners being like, "Hey man, what's the best way to bench 200 pounds?" I was like, "Start doing jujitsu with a 300-pound press, man. You'll be down to 200 pounds in no time."
how long have you been training jiu-jitsu again?
He's 7 and a little over 7.5 years now.
Love it. Love it. Yeah. It's one of the best
Started
decisions I
way
ever
too
made for
late,
my life.
man. Was
Same
that?
here. I said same here. I started earlier than you, but I didn't start until I was 30. So I'm later in my 30th year. So I'm coming up on 10 years. And it's one of the best decisions I've ever made in my life. And you
For
actually
sure.
write about this. You actually write about this in Barbell Ronin. So like not only the benefits within training do you get like the byproducts of improved health and strength, but what you apply outside of the gym. And I get that from jujitsu too. I get that from physical training, but doing hard things on purpose makes me much better at doing hard things in life, whether it's on purpose or not. And oftentimes the hard things in our life outside of those individual pursuits in training are not on purpose. I mean, sure, you can do difficult conversations with your spouse or at work and many other things on purpose, whether it's obligating the job or you just know it needs to happen. But a lot of things come to us without knowledge. And having that identity, having those systems where we show up and find a way to get it in allows us to get it in when it matters most for the people we care about most or when life needs us to do so. And I love that takeaway too. This part conversation reminded me of that in your book. It translates to so many areas of life. But once you have that mindset, you can start applying it to other domains and then focus on developing that skill set for that domain to make you better there too.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, man. Um, you mentioned HRV and bio trackers. I'm like, I've explored them in the past. I didn't use them initially. I've worn them at various times to learn about how well recovered I am or not, and based on the phases of life my children are in, based on, I was surprised at sometimes when I thought my recovery would be shit because my son would wake up many times throughout the night, and just work demands were higher. And I was actually pleasantly surprised that it looked pretty good for the few months I wore a Whoop not too long ago. But then there's been other times where I've worn it and it says I'm under recovered and I'm like, shut up. And I get it in anyways. And then and I'm in my mid to late 30s and I actually have a really good output, a really good day. I'm curious as to kind of what your opinions are on listening to the recovery data if you use them and then applying it to subjectively how you feel and following a plan or deviating from that plan based on what the machine is telling you.
My personal opinion is that the wearables and the trackers have gotten a little bit out of hand. People are um so consumed by the data that it takes away from the training. I think, sometimes you just gotta go lift some weights, man. Go run, go do something. I mean, it can create a little bit of a paranoia. I think I think if used appropriately, if used judiciously, if you use it for something to kind of keep you on target longer term, I think they can be beneficial. But, you know, there's a ring, there's a watch, there's a chest strap, there's so much stuff that you got to do. And it's cool if you want to track all that data, it's totally fine. But I mean, for me, the biggest feedback tools are just the weight on the bar going up. I like to keep things pretty simplistic. I'm a little bit more of a analog guy myself. It's the old school kind of gym rat in me. But I think they can be beneficial. I'm a huge fan of Joel Jameson. He created his current product is the Morpheus recovery or Morpheus HRV thing. It's a fantastic app. It's not subscription based. All you have to do is buy the equipment, which is just a chest strap. He used to have a watch type of tracker, but they've gone strictly to their chest monitor. It's only like $70. And there is so much information that they provide in the Morpheus app, articles, He's done tons of podcasts. Just so much content is in there about conditioning and about utilizing the Morpheus. It's not just HRV that it tracks, but HRV is the main thing. But the Morpheus recovery system and how you can use it to optimize your training. It's my favorite one because Joel is just such a solid guy, and I love like when you listen to him, he speaks to the layperson. He doesn't try to dazzle you with his brilliance, like some of these people do, especially some of these idiots in the longevity space. Uh, he just he's an accomplished coach himself. I mean, he used to train a lot of Matt Hume's guys. I mean, he started training Demetrius Johnson. He trained Demetrius through, I think, the better part of Demetrius's career. He did a lot of work with MMA fighters and those types of athletes. He's had some experience with professional football and other things among that, but he's just a brilliant conditioning coach. I really like the content that he puts out, and I do have Morpheus recovery. I was training a very high level swimmer at the time. He was ranked number one in the 50-meter freestyle in Canada. He swam at Auburn. I think he was like 9-time All American at Auburn. Then he moved to Atlanta to do his training over at Swim Atlanta. He hired me to be his strength coach, and I worked with him for many years. And he was a really high level competitor, and he got the Bioforce as a way to monitor, and that's where we started using it. And I thought, yeah, there is definitely something to this, because here's an athlete. He's coming in strength training with me 3 days a week. He's doing a lot of work in the pool. He's got to monitor his levels of readiness to make sure that he's not pushing too hard when he shouldn't be, or that he's not, that he isn't pushing hard enough when he should be. So Bioforce was pretty cool. And like I said, I just really kind of dug all the information that Joel was putting out. So I got Bioforce, and then I eventually got Morpheus when they updated it. I haven't used it in a long time. I was actually just thinking about, usually what I'll do is I'll use the Morpheus for a period of about 2 months, maybe 3 months out of the year, just to check where my HRV scores are, just to check where my resting heart rate is, just to make sure that the conditioning work that I do is providing, I've got some targets that I like for my HRV, my resting heart rate, and some of those scores. And I just try to make sure I'm within those ranges. So I don't use it on a regular basis. And I use it to really dictate my cardiovascular training. And they've got some fantastic pre-planned, workouts in the app that help you stay in your training zones, and it adjusts your training zones on a daily basis. And it's so much more effective than just using like zone 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. It adjusts based on your daily readiness. So I think it's brilliant for managing your cardio and your conditioning workouts. But again, it can be easy to get overwhelmed with the data. So I try to, I usually shy away from the technology more than most people. But I think if you find something, maybe one thing that you want to use to help optimize your training, I don't think it's a bad thing, especially if it keeps you motivated, if it keeps you on track, if it teaches you about monitoring your volume and intensity to make sure that you're doing the right amounts and not overdoing it. I think it can be really useful. But I just, with all the talk about optimizing training and science-based this and that, dude, it gets so, I don't know, man. It gets a little bit lost on me, but I think, the pendulum swings too far to one side and swings too far, somewhere right in the middle is usually the right answer for most people. So I think they can be beneficial as long as you don't let them start running your life.
That's a great nuanced answer. I mean, it is a tool that can provide you with valuable data. How you use that data and how it translates to your daily life. Like gamification is cool, and like trying to improve your resting heart rate. There's nothing wrong with that until it gets to the point of like anxiety, or
Yeah.
I need to let this tool dictate how I'm actually feeling or what I'm actually doing, and then changing it to increase your scores, but using it to stress test yourself or check yourself intermittently throughout the year through certain phases. And then of course with elite athletes or other individuals in the cardiovascular, that's also a reason I used in the past too, just seeing kind of what my output looked like at different times in different ways, and then what my resting heart rate was compared to other times in my life. It's great data to have. Knowledge is power, but then how you use that knowledge is the big differentiator. You see people use it in quite interesting ways at times. Like I said, where it can start dictating what they're doing. But yeah, good on you. It benefits to all, and it can definitely be that 1% improvement again with elite athletes. So you're tracking all these things. Here's some more data for us to consider as we are working toward the Olympics or whatever it might be. So yeah, I like that a lot.
Yeah, I
Now,
was thinking about revisiting the Morpheus, for my annual run, and then my my wife and I acquired this new rescue dog who has been keeping us up
adorable.
at night. So I'm like, man, this guy would totally be ruining my Morpheus my Morpheus score. So I'm gonna hold off until he's getting a little bit better about sleeping through the night and stuff like that. But so this is our newest
Name?
foster slash rescue edition. So
What's the name?
the rescue that we were fostering him for, they named him Murphy. Um I kind of like Coda. My wife doesn't. She likes Moose for some reason. So I got a feeling after we finally do adopt him, his name's going to be Moose. But he's awesome, man. We've got a few other dogs, and that's actually how we got this guy. One of our other rescues. It was the same rescue. They approached us about fostering, and I'm like, we're going to end up with this dog, right? She's like, I wanted to hear you say it, so he's awesome.
Adorable.
But
Adorable.
yeah,
Yeah, it's like I read a few times, like when it comes to sleep, and I've been many times in my life very interested in trying to improve my sleep, whether that is the ergonomics of it, the routines behind it, and just understanding kind of ways to do so environmentally in general. And there are things that we can control. There are many things that we cannot, including our little ones in the house, whether that be animals, like whether it's on four legs or on two legs. And
yeah,
definitely my two-legged animals have been animalistic at many times, particularly in the past few years as we had our fourth child born and my mini-me who's about to turn 5. He goes to bed, not until I go to bed. And man, he finds a way to get up darn near around the same time I get up. I try to get up early and earlier, and sometimes I have some windows, but he'll
hey,
get up.
just remember when he's going through the phase where he wants to sleep in and all that stuff, start waking him up at 5 o'clock and say, hey, buddy, paybacks.
Time to work out. You're going to the gym with me.
Exactly.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I can't wait till he trains jiu-jitsu. I've always wanted to beat myself up, and I have no doubt that when he gets to 18, I'm going to get the chance, which is another reason why I need to stay in shape.
There you go.
Because I think he's going to be big like his uncles, and that's going to be a problem.
That's
But
awesome.
yeah, so I read that like if you're getting up a few times a night, whether that's to use the restroom or, of course, to attend to family members, if it's less than 15 minutes or so each time, which on average, unless it's a tough night, it is like a handful of times maybe where I'm getting up those few times. And so when I was wearing the Whoop and checking my recovery scores, I was pleasantly surprised once again. They're like, hey, even on these nights where I get good quality sleep, my recovery scores, again, the technology, the limitations, all of it, but they looked pretty good. And even on the days that I felt a little rough, that score looked great. So fine, still get after it. And then in the past, it told me I was under recovered. And again, this is when I was training for the burpee stuff. And I didn't wear a Whoop the day that I actually set the record, but I went out like an idiot and took my son kayaking on a really hot summer day and waited till nap time to try and test for it. I was smoked. I felt like shit. And then go figure, I set a world record. So like, but even in my training, when I was under recovered and I knew what I was capable of, some of my best days were on those under recovered days. So take everything with a grain of salt, but I still like the answer that you gave with using the data, and it can be quite beneficial in many ways.
Just don't let it run your life, man.
100%. Recent Substack series that you posted, I want to come to this so I don't forget it because,
Yeah.
I mean, you have 2 new books, but you also have, like you said, your paid content. Sometimes it's written, a lot of times it's been video for some of these variations of movements that can help increase your overall, or just again to add in some variation to your training in the conjugate method style. And I've found so much value from that. This recent written series called Fix the Limiter, Build the Lift. You look at the 3 main lifts in powerlifting, so the squat, deadlift, and bench, and then you talk about assessing and what's a like beautiful, very much like your books, how succinct these posts are, but subjectively assessing where you are weak in the lift. So like where it may be most challenging. Like it's like almost like a written coaching video where, dude, these posts would easily be a great 3rd book that I would be all about. But already within these posts, what you go from determining what the limiter is in the lift to then recommending the accessories of the variations to improve upon it in the ways that you've described in this podcast already. Holy smokes, dude. I mean, you can read each of these posts in 5 or 6 minutes and the amount of information that I'm now like making notes about and waiting until the next time I test like a 90% effort on each of those lifts. I can't wait to have that at the forefront of my brain before I try these lifts and then think about where is it most difficult for me and then building a plan around it. Um, is this, are those posts inspired by something you've been doing for a long time? Where did that
Yeah.
come from? Yeah.
Yeah, no, and that's something that I kind of got from Louis as well. The and a lot of the, and I hate to keep using powerlifting as an example because I don't powerlift anymore, and I do have some people I work with that do powerlift, but a lot of the methods and ideology transfers, from powerlifting to just general strength because it's a strength sport, right? Um, but there's a tribe in the powerlifting world that, SBD, squat, bench, deadlift. That's all you need, you know? And there's some people that do well with that. I would argue that they might do better if they didn't just do that. But I'll tell you what, people have accomplished amazing things in the sport far over what I ever accomplished. So I'm not here to criticize anybody, but I just kind of think in terms of what I've seen with the people that I've worked with, where we've had successes and what hasn't worked. If you just rely on the basic movements, you can definitely you can definitely get strong doing that. There was a great power lifter named Mark Chalet back in the day. If you ever read Marty Gallagher's work, I highly recommend his book, The Purposeful Primitive. He's a brilliant writer. He was a great powerlifting coach. He coached and handled Ed Cohn and Kurt Karwoski, and he trained with Mark Chalet and handled Mark. I mean, he's a real historian in the sport of powerlifting. He's a great writer, but he talks about how Mark used to train, and Mark had a gym, Chalet's gym, and on Mondays he would go in and he would squat. He would work up to a 1 rep max. He would bench press. He would work up to a 1 rep max and he would leave. On Thursdays, he would come in. He would deadlift. He would work up to a 1 rep max and he would leave. And that was it. He said, our sport is the single rep in the squat, bench, and deadlift. So sport specificity rules. That's what we have to train for. And he accomplished amazing things. He was a phenomenal lifter. It works. I'm not saying it doesn't. But the problem is if one muscle in the chain of movements that is performing the exercise is the limiting factor, that's where that's what's always going to be holding back the lift, right? And a lot of times in the squat and the deadlift is the lower back, because the lower backs tend to be weak on most people because they don't know how to train their lower backs, or they just rely on the deadlift to build the lower back. Well, guess what? The minute the lower back fails, you're done deadlifting, right? But your legs and your hips might be capable of pulling more. Your upper back might be capable of pulling more. Your grip might be capable of pulling more. Same with the squat. If the lower back is holding your squat back, you're only going to squat to what your lower back. So if your lower back can only support 400 pounds, but your legs can lift 600 pounds, you're going to squat 400 pounds, right? So if we use the main lifts, or even the variations, the max effort variations of the main lifts, going back to the specialized variety we talked about.
Yep.
And this is where, you can find these max effort exercises that you work into your rotations that can be like your testers and your builders, so to speak, right? So if you look at a lift, like going back to the low box safety bar squat or something like that, where does that lift cause you to fail? Well, if you video yourself or you got good training partners or coaches that have eyes on you, they can see where you're breaking down in that lift, and they can say it's your lower back, it's your upper back, it's your abs, it's your quads, it's your hamstrings. They can identify based on where you're failing in the lift, right? And then, through your supplementary and accessory exercises, what muscle groups you need to hammer at the beginning of the workout when you're fresh. So you do the main lift, use that as an assessment tool, and then the accessory work, which represents about 80% of the training in the conjugate method, the barbell lifts represent about 20, at least that's what Louis always used to say. You can prioritize your supplementary and accessory work based on those weaknesses. If your triceps are holding your bench back, you need to hammer your triceps right after the main movement. Don't save them till the end when you're super fatigued and you can't put any effort into it. If your back's not an issue, save your back for the end. Or if your shoulders aren't, so you prioritize the muscles that you train with the accessories and the supplementary work based on what your weaknesses are. The main lift becomes the assessment tool. Yeah, it's driving your strength up because it's teaching you how to strain, or if it's on the dynamic day, it's teaching you to improve your rate of force production. But the primary lifts can also be assessment tools, which allow you to analyze where you're breaking down. Is your speed slowing down? Is your lower back holding you back? Is it your grip? Is it your upper back? You can use that main lift as the assessment, and then you apply the supplementary and accessory work based on that weakness and prior. And then as that weakness becomes a new strong point, constantly identify and assess and find out what the new weakness is. If it's your triceps holding your bench back, well, after a while hammering your triceps aren't going to be the weak point anymore. It might be your delts, it might be your pecs, it might be your back, right? So then you rotate and specialize or prioritize your accessory work based on that constant assessment and evaluation. And I never realized how important that was when I was coaching my powerlifting team. I always thought triceps, triceps for the bench press. After, it's always triceps. You read Louis' work, triceps, right? So after our main movements, we would hammer the tricep, close grips, extensions, elbows out extensions, push downs, overhead extension, you name it. We would just annihilate the triceps. And I had this one girl who was training with me. This guy and this girl, we all went up to West Side on this one trip to train one time. And this is what really kind of dialed in this whole point that we're talking about us using the list for assessment tools and prioritizing our weaknesses and stuff. She wanted to bench 200 pounds. That was her goal, right? She benched 185, but anytime she would try 185.1 or anything heavier, if a fly landed on the bar, it wasn't getting off her chest. 185 flies up. 190 pins her to the bench, And it's like, damn, man, we're hammering the triceps. I don't know what's going on. So she, myself, and this other powerlifter I had, this other guy, the three of us are up at Westside on this training trip. And I asked Louis, I said, hey, man, would you mind, we're stuck on the bench. We can't figure this out. Would you mind giving her some feedback? He said, yeah, go ahead and warm them up and work them up and I'll take a look. So he pulls out a chair, he watches. I put them on the benches up there. We start warming up and sure enough, she hits 185, smokes it. Thought like, hey, it would be awesome to bench my first 200 at Westside, put 200 on, stapled to the bench, Same with the guy. We worked him up, watched him fail. And Louis said, he goes, it's not your technique. Your technique looks great. Your technique's perfect. He said, she's got no front delts. And I thought, she doesn't. You look at her shoulder and it's flat, Her triceps were ginormous because we were doing all this work on the tricep. We weren't doing anything for the deltoids other than some side raises or whatever. And I thought, shit. And he goes, she needs to do a lot of front raises, dumbbells, plate, just do a lot of front raises. And he said, do you guys do push-ups? I'm like, no. He goes, you got to do push-ups. And he took us over to the power rack. He put a barbell across the sumo base on the power rack and he put us through this push-up workout, doing skull crushers like as push-ups and doing all these push-up exercises. I'm like, good Lord, man, my arms were absolutely trashed after that. So he's like, yeah, have her do a lot of push-ups and have her work her front delts. Keep the triceps, but don't prioritize. Put them at the end of the workout, right? So we go back and she just, not planned, but she had a powerlifting meet 6 weeks after that trip to Westside. And we did what he said. She's doing plate raises. She's doing front delt raises. I thought she was doing too much, but hey, she's just hammering away at it, right? So we go to the powerlifting meet and we always played conservative with the opener. She opened with 165. It's a lift she could make for 3 blindfolded on a bad day, right? Goes to 190 because we get that 5-pound PR and she absolutely crushes 190. It was in such a hurry to come off the chest. Thought, damn, that 200 is going to go. So in powerlifting, you only get 3 attempts, right? So we made the third attempt at 200 because that was the ultimate goal. The 200 went just as fast as the 190. She could have done 220 that day, and she did. She ended up doing 225 at a meet, down the road. But it was unlocking the front delts. And all Louis had to do was look at her and say, it's her damn shoulders. There's no muscle there. And I thought, good Lord, man, this is how brilliant, because he's had multiple decades. He can just visually look at you. And that's the coach's eye. And that really opened up my mind to saying, we don't just have to do this template where you do the main lift, you do the triceps, you do the lats and the upper back, and you do the delt, because that's how it was always written out. So that's how we always did it. And that's when it made me realize, like, we've got to start getting better eyes in the gym. We got to start assessing, using these lists as assessment tools. You can tell how somebody performs an exercise, what is weak. You can just see it, if you know what you're looking for. So that's what I started doing. And I started just adjusting my lifters on a day-to-day basis. I would just watch them, and for a while I was lifting with them, but, I would watch their reps. I'd be right there coaching them. I'd be right there watching them. I'd see where they're breaking down. And I knew, well, for Craig, it was his lower back on a squat. He's got to go hit the reverse hyper right after we're done squatting, and then he's going to work his hamstrings, and then he's going to work his abs. You know, if he's having a hard time breaking the ground with the deadlift, I knew it was his hips. So he's going to do glute ham raises. It just became so easy and so simplistic at that point. It's like, man, these are all different. Why are we all doing the same damn thing? I need to train her. I need to train him. I need to train him. They all need to do different things. They got different body sizes, different weaknesses, different strengths, bigger hands, smaller hands, introverted, extroverted. I mean, it starts making you realize that there's so many factors that go into coaching somebody other than just writing out a workout. And that's what gets me so like jacked up about these like online coaches nowadays. All they're doing is shoveling out templates to people for like $200 a month. It's like, no, man, you have got to assess what they're doing and you've got to restructure their work based on what their weaknesses are. I mean, it seems like a no brainer, but it's kind of shocking how many people don't implement that.
I love everything about it. It's just so much deeper and better than even I imagined. But again, in these posts, it's so simple, and like you write it so like you can think about your own lift and just calling the main lifts assessment tools rather than like what we're striving toward. That's a stress test. That's what it's all about. Like no, we continually use that to assess. And what you said, where there's always going to be a limiting factor. Once you correct your previous limiting factor, now there's a new one. So in this effort to continue to progress or an attempt to sustain and be like Marshall Peterson and try to still be pulling amazing numbers and when you're almost 80. Like we need to evolve our thinking. It's still simple, but my goodness, what you've just described here, particularly in today's day and age where you can get access to almost anything and everything, dollar sign behind it usually, even though a lot of your stuff does not have a dollar sign behind it, but the benefit of a coach, the benefit of, yeah, you can give me, like you're doing in this conversation right now, a lot of things that I can take and make my own, but there may still be some limiting factors based on my limited knowledge, my limited experience and expertise in this realm. So I can feel where it might be hard in my deadlift, but to have a coach's eye on me in that assessment to help me accurately assess how I can shift my programming to build the next time we assess the lift and assess the limiters. It's just like you always evolve the way that I look at training. And yeah, we're talking strength for most of this, but these methods can apply to anything. So whether that is a different training system, you think about, I had one guy that was what was he? He was a search and rescue diver in the Navy for 30 years. And then he went into civilian service for like another 20 and just retired, but became a good buddy. And he was talking about how they would go about training their swimming. And like you would think, but the Jocko method, to get better at swimming, you get in the pool and you just swim as hard as you can for as long as you can and just swim more. And he was like, no, so much variability. Some days they have the board out in front of them, fins on or off. It's just all legs. And some days it's long, some days it's slow, different methods, and then all arms, and then different variations of strokes, all to build upon their ability to swim as hard for as long as possible when it came time for the real deal in the water when they're saving lives. But that variability and the why behind it. And then assessing limitations when they have all the instructors around them that have been there. It just the benefit of a coach. I keep coming back to that. Like we can learn so much on our own, but if we truly want to grow, having someone like you and gathering the real wisdom that, of course, is transcendent from your mentor.
Well, it goes back to Musashi. If you know the way broadly, you'll see it in all things, or whatever. I'm sure I butchered that a little bit, but
No.
I mean, it's the way's the way. It can apply to everything, but when you can see it broadly, you can see it in everything.
Well, you write the way as well as anyone I have found, brother, when it comes to physical training. And I am honored to call you a friend. And just like last time, a little over an hour. And my goodness, will I be re-listening? Will I be taking notes? And do I have more things to add to what I'll be doing in the gym tomorrow?
I feel like I failed though, because I thought, how am I going to ever top Connor Heffernan coming on to your podcast and working in striated glutes into like first minute or minute and a half? I thought that is literally the last thing I would have ever expected to hear him come out of his mouth. I mean, I thought it just should have been Connor Heffernan striated glutes, the title of the show. But
As you said, and I have you to thank for many things, but getting the chance to talk to that man and playing.
I was so freaking excited for that to come out. And then when you told me you guys were going to do it, I'm like, yes. And then you're like, no, we got to reschedule because he's got that. I'm like, no, I was just like chomping at the bit, dude.
Yeah,
I will listen to that guy talk all day, any day. He's one of my favorite people on the planet, man. I mean,
awesome.
I'm so much, I love, and this is what I think we're missing so much is the, the history of the industry, right? So many people don't know their roots when it comes to this. And it just, going back to that power lifter I was telling you that I took up to West Side that worked on our bench, I'll never forget. So she was training with one of the best power lifters in history, this guy named Steve Goggins, right? Steve was like a counterpart to Ed Cohn, one of the greatest lifters ever. Steve's down here in Georgia now. He was the first man to squat over 1,100 pounds in powerlifting contests. He's an awesome guy. I'm glad I've gotten to meet him and know him. Amazing lifter, one of the greatest ever. And she was being coached by him for a while before she started training with me. And when Steve got inducted into the Powerlifting Hall of Fame, it was the class was Ed Cohn, Steve Goggins, and Louis Simmons. And Louis turned it down. He said, I'm not done yet. I'm not dead. I'm not done. I don't need to be inducted in Hall of Fame. I still got work to do. But Ed and Steve graciously accepted their nominations. And she went up to York Barbell for the ceremony or whatever. And she told me that was the first time she'd ever heard about Ed Cohn. And I'm like, that'd be like a high school basketball player being like, hey, what do you think about Jordan? Who's Michael Jordan? I'm just like, I didn't know what to say, and I'm like, and I'm not faulting. I mean, it's nothing on her, but I'm like, how do you compete in powerlifting and not know the greatest of all time? And especially like when your coach is like one of the greatest of all time, it's just like I think on some level you need to understand where this came from, so you can get kind of an idea of maybe where it's going, or maybe like I'm not a fan of the direction like powerlifting's going myself. But because I know where it came from and I also know what came before powerlifting. And I'm just so fascinated by strength history, especially when you go back and you read all these old books on physical culture from the late 1800s, early 1900s, and you see like what they were doing, what they were writing about. It's like, man, the shit really hasn't changed. Yeah, we
Yeah.
have more equipment now. We've got some, but my God, like you said earlier, the basics are still the basics. And thank God there's people out there like Connor who have taken it upon themselves and their life's work to learn this stuff and to recycle this stuff and to write about this stuff to give us the opportunity to educate ourselves and learn about the history of this thing that we supposedly love to do. It's just awesome. And the guys, I know you said something about having all three of us on, man, but that'd be really tough because I'd just be like sweaty handed mouth breather and like, oh my God, it's Connor.
I said you would be
But
the president of his fan club. We are 100% going to do that, though. And that man is as entertaining as he is brilliant. And not only on the mic, where, as you said, striated glutes and all the other funny things, he's just so funny and witty.
oh, he's
But
hysterical. Yeah.
his writing is the exact same way. He makes sometimes history, particularly for people who are not history buffs, are not the most entertaining reads, even if it's in a domain that you're very passionate about. Like a lot of people train, we don't know shit about where these training systems came from, and we all think it's like some brand new revolutionary thing. And like, no, not only are the basics centuries old, but so is the nonsense. And like learning about all the bullshit from the past too,
Yeah.
on where people are selling. You name it, some weird potion that's going to make you grow,
Yeah. The,
or
the,
the
the
5 pound
snake oil
dumbbell system.
salesman, man. Yeah,
Exactly.
he talked about like Eugene Sandow and stuff like that in his new
Yep.
book. About and how they the whole idea of the fitness huckster. It was around back then, man. It's
So
not
funny.
just nowadays, but so cool.
Yeah. So thank you for introducing me because that was another fun one. And boy, was today a fun one, man. I can't wait to see what you keep producing. I'm here for all of it. Future books, of course, the same Substack content that you keep killing it with. Thank you for taking the time to talk to me, brother. I look forward to the next one.
Awesome, man. Thanks. And I think we got to close with a shout out to Marshall. I got to know if he's gotten his reverse hyper yet. So Marshall, get that reverse hyper and get working on that lower back. So thanks, man. I really appreciate it.
Thank you too, brother. Remember, all the knowledge in the world means little unless you uniquely apply it to your life. Challenge yourself to take action. Knowledge applied is wisdom earned. Determine what is important to you and get after it with intention, effort, and consistency. Until next time, stay resilient, my friends.